live stream worship service. I am Rev Alexa, and my pronouns are she and her. I am delighted to be your pastoral care minister for this church here. Accotink UU Church is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just, compassionate world through our actions to bring about justice and by honoring the web of nature of which we are a part. All are welcome here, no matter whom you love, no matter your identity or heritage, no matter your beliefs or background, no matter your means or abilities. You are welcome here in this religious community. All are also welcome to share in a time for conversation and connection after the worship. Simply stay in the Zoom meeting after worship to join in.
If you're new to Accotink and would like to talk more about this church, please be sure to reach out to me, our minister, Reverend Pippin, or a member of the board. Contact information is posted on our website, www.accotinkuu.org. On our website, you can check the online order of service in the worship section of our webpage. While you're on the website, be sure to check our events page for upcoming virtual gatherings and other news. I now invite you to close your other windows or apps and devices, take a deep breath, and center yourself for worship. Please light your chalice with Reverend Alexa and me as I say these words honoring stillness, our theme for the month of December. Reverend Suzelle Lynch writes, "From winter's cold and stillness comes the diamond sparkle of snow. From the empty chalice comes the dancing flame that fuels our faith. Stillness cannot last but a moment. It is the held breath, the pause between heartbeats, the focused attention of patient waiting. These are not forever, but we are better for having known them. We light this chalice for stillness."
For those of you who are new, and I guess to those of you who aren't visitors, and also those who come most every Sunday, today will look and feel quite different from the way worship services here look normally. And I'll say that I could say that most Sundays, but this perhaps a little bit more. If you are a visitor, come back and visit again to experience something closer to a normal Sunday service here. Normally at a Unitarian Universalist congregation, at our worship service, we have hymns, poetry readings, and very often a musical performance or two or more. They're beautiful. And almost for sure, there are a lot of words, as was said in Pygmalion, and very little silence. Unitarian Universalists aren't much on long spells of silence. And yet today, that is what we will be experiencing and experimenting with. And less music from our wonderful Brad next week. Come back. Let us enjoy the stillness together. So kids and adults, I want to ask about how long it takes you to make a good, clear, and hard decision about something. As a kid, and that's also involves waiting, involves learning, right? As a kid, I might ask, what's for dinner? And if whoever was cooking hadn't decided yet, I'd get, you'll see. Or there was the year I wanted a kitten for Christmas. I kept asking from Thanksgiving through Christmas if it would be there on Christmas morning. That was a long, long wait. I had a friend who had a new baby brother or sister coming back before the doctor could tell you if it would be a boy or a girl. My friend told me she felt like she had been waiting her whole life to meet her little brother. I found, and even today find, waiting so hard, so very hard. So what would you think if I told you that it took about 100 years for people in the Quaker faith, a faith that we'll be talking about a lot today, to reach one of their big decisions and then to announce it to the people who were waiting and wondering what the decision would be. And what if I told you that even having taken 100 years to reach that decision, they reached it about 100 years before others in this country did? The question was about slavery. That is, when one person owns another, and the laws of the country support that as legal. What a white person can do when a white person can do anything to a black person they own. Yes, really anything. Before this country existed, when it was just a couple of colonies, Quakers, members of the Society of Friends, were like other whites here who bought and sold black people as slaves. But eventually they went through a process to decide you couldn't be a slaveholder and a Quaker. They would read you out of meeting. That says you are not welcome here anymore. You cannot call yourself a Quaker. 100 years to decide. But they decided 100 years before the Civil War, which answered that question for our nation as a whole. I often think about what that Quaker decision was. Was it slow or was it fast? Was it slow because it took 100 years, or fast because they got there about 100 years before the rest of our nation did? Any thoughts on that? I bet your parents would be delighted to talk with you about what is a long time or a short time to reach a decision. Silence invites our bodies into stillness. Stillness invites us to look inward and to listen to the still, small voice within us. So we pray. I'm a former Quaker or friend, and I'm talking about Quakerism for a couple of different reasons. First, most of our kids study different faiths to learn about them. This harkens back to our church next door curricula, where we as Unitarian Universalists study other faiths. That means we can't just plunge into silence today, pretending to be Quakers, but rather we need to talk a bit about the theologies and rationale behind that faith before we enter into that silence. Second, lots of UUs are attracted to Quakerism, and that attraction can be reciprocal. Indeed, the Universalists and the Friends have enormous theological similarities, at least back in time, and there was some talk of merger before the Unitarians and the Universalists merged instead. Last, there are an enormous number of UU friend marriages. I personally have 4 such couples in my sphere. By experiencing Quaker worship today and learning a bit about Quaker beliefs, maybe you and your UU Quaker people will understand one another better. And for most of our time together today, we will move into silence, and we will be there for, I'm not going to say how long, but it will maybe be a little bit of a stretch, particularly on Zoom. I've been talking with my Quaker friends who still go to Quaker meeting, and they say, yes, it's a little odd, but on Sunday mornings and sometimes on Wednesday nights, we gather together and we sit silently together on Zoom. So this thing of coming together for spiritual connection can happen, does happen through Zoom, as we've all experienced with poetry and words, and as I believe we will experience today in silence. The Religious Society of Friends was founded as a faith that didn't agree with much of what was going on in the Church of England in the 1640s in Britain. The early Friends were Christians, and they had some of the same historical roots as Unitarians. That is to say that they were offshoots of the Arians. As you may recall, Arians were a non-Trinitarian branch on the Christian tree. And as I said, most Quakers believed in some version of universal salvation. So again, there were theological similarities. Friends believe that there is that of God in everyone. There is a light or a spark, a reality that God resides in all of us. Since it's an odd expression and not everybody has heard it, I'm going to say it again. There is that of God in everyone. Friends are pacifists because one must honor, not try to kill that of God in a person. Similarly, they are social justice activists as a way of honoring God in each of us. Friends are reformers. And of course, in the modern day, some friends are atheists and some humanists and some Christian, but that idea of the light within remains. So what is with that very different names, the two different names, Friends and Quakers? The name Friends comes from Jesus's remark that you are my friends, and if you do what I command you, John 15:14. The name Quakers, which I think is more commonly used in this country, comes from George Fox, one of the founders of Quakerism, telling a magistrate to tremble or quake in the name of God. So he told the magistrate what to do, very Quaker, and it was originally an insult used against friends, that they were people who quaked in the sight of God. And but Friends took it on as a loving name, and as I say, it's the most common name used here in America. There are two branches of Quakerism: programmed and unprogrammed. The programmed ones mostly live west of the Mississippi, and their services are very similar to a standard Protestant church service with a minister and hymns. Some of the most famous Quakers in America, including the two Quaker presidents, Richard Nixon and Herbert Hoover, participated in programmed services. So they're sort of not so much what we're talking about. That line of the faith is not so much what we're talking about today. What I am speaking about today are the more traditional friends, the ones who have meetings for worship in silence. That is silence till somebody speaks, and more on that in a moment. Unprogrammed Quakers built on the ideas in the Christian Bible, particularly in Matthew 18:20, which states that where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them. I love that quote. To friends, where 2 or more gather with the intent of worship, God will be present. And COVID-era Quakers, as I said, have confirmed that Zoom is a fine way to gather together. Old times Quakers were famous for plain clothing, saying thee and thou for their honesty. They are also famous as pacifists. So Friends didn't want to be ostentatious, and plain dress was a natural for them. Additionally, most of the colors of the 17 and 1800s came from slave labor, for instance, indigo. And my grandmother, and so you certainly wouldn't wear that as the dye on your clothing if you were a Quaker. My grandmother stopped being a Quaker back in the 1920s because she wanted to wear red and dance, and neither of those things were allowed in her West Virginia Quaker community. Back in the 1600s, English had 2 words for you. The formal word was you, and an informal word was thou. If you speak another language, think usted and tu in Spanish, or vous and tu in French. Quakers believed all the people were equal, and thus they would not use the word you explicitly to people in power, such as judges. Instead, they used the thee and the thou to everyone. Children to parents, which was radical and really unacceptable to the society at large. Citizens to monarchs, and judges and government officials often imprisoned them for what was seen as their disrespectful speech. The word you, that word of power, was reserved for talking with God. Friends are really careful not to lie. In fact, they refuse to swear in a Bible because they always spoke the truth, and to imply that they would only speak the truth by putting a hand on a Bible was anathema to them. So if you have been, excuse me, in a court hearing where you are asked to swear or solemnly affirm that what you are about to say is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, the affirm part of that is a hangover, probably from Quakerism. Friends were and are egalitarian with regard to gender. The Quaker school that I attended, and actually my son attended, and we had a couple pictures of the recent incarnation of their meeting house in our slide deck so far. It was founded in 1883. I attended kindergarten through 12th grade. And it was coeducational from its founding in 1883. It also became interracial very early in the 1900s in Washington, D.C. In the early years, yes, Friends are pacifists. Quakers were one of the first faiths in the U.S. to obtain the right to conscientious objection to military service. Often Friends accepted very dangerous duties such as ambulance driving rather than carry a weapon or be asked to kill. So who are Quakers now? Like us, they have Christian roots, but no creed, and each friend determines their own theology. When I joined a meeting for worship back in Madison, Wisconsin in the 1980s, when I was there for my PhD, my Clearness Committee, the group of elders who were responsible for helping me determine if Quakerism was for me, said, the 5 or so people who were on that committee said that they were theists, non-theists, atheists, agnostics, and a humanist. I know no pagan Quakers, and of course there are Christians in some congregations, which sounds pretty much like us here and now. Like Unitarian Universalists, each Quaker meeting, both the meeting service and the building are called the meeting, is independent of the others. There is no power, such as a bishop or pope, over Friends, just as there is no such power over us. George Fox and his fellow religious leaders, including Margaret Fell and many other women, believed that by sitting in silence in a group, a direct first-hand encounter with the Spirit was possible. It was as simple as that. You sat in silent worship in a group and listened intently for the words of God that might come to you. And this is huge, if the words came, it was for you to discern. Were these words for you, or were they ministry? That is, words that should be shared with the group. Probably most of what was discerned was actually a personal message. Wisdom might come by listening, but it is each person's job to distinguish if the wisdom was for you or for all present. If the words were for you, then you hold on to them silently. If they are for the group, then the person would stand and say a few words loud enough for all to hear and then return to sitting. There is always several minutes between those who speak, between someone speaking and the next person who speaks is unlikely to respond to the first. In our meeting here today, we will use the chat function instead of standing to talk. Nevertheless, I imagine that several moments will go by between posts. And there may be no posts at all. Many meetings have no people speak, and those where too many people speak are somewhat disparagingly called popcorn meetings, where the beautiful and sacred silence we create by gathering together isn't established because of people talking so much. I attended Quaker meeting from age 5 through about 35. I have sat in Quaker meetings around the globe, and always, yes, for all those years, I wondered what I bet you are wondering right now. What the heck am I to do with my mind during this silence? Am I to meditate? Am I to try to silence or squash my inner voice? You say I'm to listen for the voice of God, but what does that sound like? And maybe I don't even believe in God. If I do, or if I'm going to suspend my disbelief for today, how can I tell this voice from my own? To borrow from the Buddhist framing, how do I differentiate it from monkey mind? My personal best response as to how to spend the time in silence in meeting for worship is to develop a query that you will ask yourself today. Maybe it will morph, maybe it will turn into more than one. Again, I'm thinking of Buddhism, and I do think there are some similarities. A query is a little bit like a koan, for those of you who know it, though generally queries are more focused on tackling a moral or spiritual problem than koans are. Queries that have occupied me over my many Quaker meetings I've participated include, what is my next right step? How can I live my best life of service to the divine? How can I pull more love into my life and express that? What stands in the way of my being open to the transforming power of God? Where am I now? What do I need to do? And of course, the ever popular, how can I get over my momentary anger at that loved one and move into a more loving stance towards them? There are some queries that have brought me closer to the divine, and only you can determine what you need to be thinking about in our soon to come time of worshipful silence together. I'll repeat those queries that have sustained me. What is my next right step? How can I live my best life of service to the divine? How can I pull more love into my life and share it? What stands in the way of my being open to the transforming power of God? Where am I now? What do I need to do? And of course, how can I get over my momentary anger at that loved one and move into a more loving stance towards them? What you do in your mind is absolutely up to you. This is essentially an inward experience. Quakerism is a subdued faith, a subtle faith. Someone may speak, or perhaps no one will. And of course, by speak, I mean put their message in the chat. Both silence and listening to somebody's message that they record are spiritual practices. Today, because we are in this funny Zoom world of low stimulation and too much stimulation, it goes both ways. I'm asking our tech folks to put up a slideshow, which your wonderful administrator, RW, pulled together. A slow and quiet slideshow of what you might see in a Quaker meeting space if we were gathering together in person. I've spent many a friends meeting looking at ancient wooden beams or how the stones in a wall fit together. Often looking at windows, out windows. All of those are things that you will see in today's slideshow. If it doesn't build your experience, feel free to look away. Maybe you have a window near you. Maybe you will close your eyes. Maybe you will have a soft focus gaze and not look at the slides at all. All of this is an invitation inward, inspiration for reflection, not a stimulus for engagement. If we were in person, when it came time to break our meeting for worship, I would shake the hand of an elder next to me, and then I would invite you to shake the hands of those who are seated next to you. All of that is done in silence. If you have others in your home today, feel free to shake their hands when the end of the meeting comes. Today, I will, however, ring a chime to indicate the end of our Quaker meeting. Then Sheila will extinguish the chalice, and in silence, we will move into our coffee hour. Let the silence begin. So begins our Quaker meeting. Thank you for a beautiful time together. Thank you for the shared messages. I hope the unshared messages were equally powerful and important for you. Thank you for experiencing this stillness.